and when he comes back, we were talking about a color revolution within the United States. And it's something that I noticed very early when Hillary and Bill were both wearing purple. And I think I sent you a picture of that, right? I DM'd you that picture.
Yes.
When Bill, and did you see that picture?
I did. It was very purple, yeah. As
soon as I saw that picture where she's wearing like this, I don't know, like a tuxedo thing she was wearing, right? And it was a nice tuxedo. And it was kind of a weird looking outfit. And Bill always looks good, right? I mean, he wore the color flag revolution thing, purple, nicely. With her, it was it kind of beats her over the head. She was like, So I mean, we both read that article. What are your thoughts on the article? It was in the Revolver, George Kent, and kind of the whole
the Revolver News article.
Yeah.
No, I've talked about this elsewhere. It's a very excellent article in Revolver News that kind of echoes some of the points that I've been trying to develop about, what a color revolution is and how people might understand or contextualize what's been going on with these riots, because it's an extension of the very natural question kind of that was implicit in some of my commentary earlier. It's like, why is the government letting this happen? It's clear that there's some kind of power behind these riots because the full force of the federal government is clearly not being used to suppress and stop them. And I noticed some curious coincidences, shall we say. There's a coincidence in terms of strategy and tactics. So these color revolutions, for people watching who may not be familiar with the term, color revolution refers to a series of revolutions that have been conducted with the support and kind of really organizational support of certain bureaucracies within the United States government, principally the State Department, but also covert agencies. And they, along with their kind of nexus or constellation of aligned NGOs, non-governmental organizations that they install in these countries, are able to undermine and sometimes overthrow political targets that they don't like, not using direct violence, not using the regime change model like we saw in Iraq, but using the color revolution model, which consists of agitating the population, usually young people, student groups, women, organizing protests, and there's certain hallmarks of their approach. So front-loading something that in advance generates doubt as to the legitimacy of a future election. And so that's what they were doing, for instance, in Belarus, generating doubt about Lukashenko in advance, saying, oh, he's going to rig it, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. You see it here in the United States now with this weird like mailbox thing that they're suggesting, like, Trump is somehow rigging the election because the post office is, inefficient and antiquated. The post office is basically blockbuster at this point. It's just and for that reason, it's supposed to kind of suggest something ominous about Trump. But what it really is generating doubt in people's minds. So after the fact, people can say, this might not be legitimate, and then further agitate these crowds that are associated with the network of NGOs to do peaceful protests, which is actually a term of art. Peaceful protest is a term of art, you see. All of these Atlanticist State Department aligned organizations use peaceful protests as a term of art in relation to Belarus. They've used it as a term of art in Ukraine, probably the most famous color revolution, the Orange Revolution, then later the Maidan protest. Victoria Nuland, who's a principal figure in these color revolutions, took the unusual step of actually going to the protests. And the one thing that she said was, how dare the Ukrainian government crack down on these peaceful protests? So what they do is they generate massive protests and kind of entice the authorities to crack down on the protests. And they use those crackdowns as a pretext to further undermine the legitimacy of their target government. So anyway, I won't get into the whole thing for the sake of brevity. Suffice it to say that what's going on in the United States, and really what's been going on since Trump won the election, has ticked every box in the color revolution playbook. But it gets even more explosive than that, because it's not just a parallelism with respect to the strategies and tactics. It's literally the same people. It's literally the people who are, in the State Department running Europe and Eurasia policy, who are there as color revolution experts, who have been running operations in Ukraine, Belarus, you name it. It's precisely those people who have been the principal players in this coordinated effort to undermine the legitimacy and ultimately overthrow Trump in this attempt to overturn the 2016 election. It's literally the same people. And so in the revolver.news article that you refer to, it basically encapsulates the argument that I described in the person of George Kent, who is a never Trump star impeachment witness, who, unlike his colleagues that he defended in his testimony, Jovanovich and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Bill Taylor and all these types who were actually fired on the basis of their testimony against effectively their boss, namely the president. This character, George Kent, despite being a key and star never Trump witness, wasn't fired like those colleagues he defended. In fact, he was promoted. And the article that you mentioned at Revolver News points out the curious fact that he just happens to head Belarus at the State Department. And his previous employment just happened to include being deputy chief of station in Ukraine and being a so-called deputy political counselor during the Orange Revolution, which is arguably, I would say not arguably, inarguably the most famous and notorious color revolution ever run. And so it can all boil down to the simple formulation. It's the same people and it's the same playbook. They're running the same playbook against Trump, whom they hate, against all of the Eastern European leaders that they hate. Same people, same playbook. The color revolution in the Ukraine was called the Orange Revolution. Now we have Black Lives Matter. So we've gone from Orange Revolution to Black Lives Matter. I formulated as follows: black is the new orange.
Oh, that's interesting. My wife loves that show, so that's interesting. I'll have to consider that. But so do they actually want to turn Trump over? Because it seems like
yes.
But they've been able to accomplish so much with them in power just by subverting him and by subterfuge everywhere he goes. So I mean, that's
true, but they would still be much better for him to get rid of him. And I think even more than Trump, like, just personally, Trump terrifies them in the sense that, I have mixed feelings about Trump. I'm generally a supporter. I think, he really needs to win in 2020 or otherwise we're all screwed. And I hope he wins. And, I wish he would listen to me more in terms of communication strategy. He's actually very good. It's just some people, in the communication shop just don't understand how to convey an effective message. Trump's instincts, for all of his, he's not a perfect man. He's a character. He's kind of a great figure in some sense, but he's also very flawed. But whatever one says about him, he does have good instincts when it comes to communication. And unfortunately, those instincts can sometimes be superseded by bad advice. But yes. Despite wait. Just to finish the point, these people, yes, they're able to do a lot even under Trump, but more so than the Trump as a man who it's Trump as a phenomenon that terrifies them. And these Atlanticist groups that I described, the kind of nexus of NGOs, State Departments, so forth, that hate Trump so much, it's a curious thing. You have three events that really come together to constitute the kind of operation landscape for these actors. And that is, number one, the Russian invasion of Crimea, which was very disruptive to these people. I'm not saying it was a good thing. It's disruptive because it all amounts to energy. And as a sophisticated person in finance, I'm sure you understand all of that probably more than I do. But it's largely about energy in that respect. But it wasn't only the Putin's incursion into Crimea. It was also two other events that are sort of the political twin towers from the point of view of this specific faction of the ruling class that I'm describing, and that is Brexit and the election of Trump. These Atlanticist groups view so-called populism as an existential threat to their power, and they treated those twin populist events as an existential threat on the order, if not more so, than Putin's invasion of Crimea, and then the election of people that they don't approve of in Eastern Europe. And they were very cleverly able to combine those three events, killing three birds with one stone, or at least attempting to do so, by connecting them narratively and saying that Trump and all of these populist movements are basically extensions of Russia. And therefore, de facto, as a narrative matter, all of the energies associated with those populist victories are suspect as disinformation coming from Russia. And they were able to shut down vast swaths of the internet, actually. The whole internet censorship story actually aligns very closely with the interests and the activities of these Atlanticist groups. And you can look at, for instance, the Atlantic Council has a series of events called disinformation events. And disinformation is a term of art effectively used to shut down domestic speech under the pretext of national security. And so there are many components to this. It would require probably several of these periscopes to even begin to do justice to the tip of the iceberg, let alone the whole thing. But I'm trying to just very broadly sketch some of the pieces and gesture toward why these things are so important.
So it's interesting because part of the theory of my histories was, and I reference it a lot, but I enjoy and appreciate history so much, really a lot. And I like kind of recreating not that era into now and trying to kind of fit those puzzles together, but it's very helpful for me to look at alternatives that have happened and how they've played out and, different routes. So one of my takeaways from the Peloponnesian War and everything that played out was in the end, well, I can think of other events also, but in the end, tyrannies always turn inwards.